present this paper. I studied with Mario Davidovsky during my master's and doctoral program. We've kept up ever since. In any case, Davidovsky was born in 1934 and is regarded as one of the most important pioneers of electronic music. He's known for his 12 synchronisms, which span a range from 1962 to the present, in which acoustic instruments are paired with fixed electronic sound. Davidovsky's innovations are essentially musical rather than technical. He has created a personal language made up of hybrid electronic and instrumental sound elements, creating meta-instruments and characterized by constant shifts in time and spatial perspective, tempo, and narrative continuity. Synchronisms number 10 from 1992 for guitar and pre-recorded electronic sound displays all these ideas, which I will summarize and enumerate and illustrate. Davidovsky was born in 1934 and he's regarded in the United States and in Europe as an important pioneer of electronic music. He's best known for his... Did I just read this? I'm sorry. I just read the abstract. Let me just go on. Okay. He was born.
Could you be a bit more slowly?
Okay. Born in Matanos, Argentina in 1934. Mario Davidovsky is the son of immigrant Polish-Jewish parents who arrived in Argentina at the turn of the century. Aaron Copland invited Davidovsky as a fellow to Tanglewood for a performance of his Nonetto in 1958. Working closely with Copland, Davidovsky met Milton Babbitt, and in 1960 he returned to the United States under a succession of Guggenheim and Rockefeller grants at the Columbia-Princeton Electronic Music Center. Davidovsky is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the Fannie P. Mason Professor of Music Emeritus at Harvard University. He is the former director of the Columbia-Princeton Electronic Music Center. Synchronisms number 6 was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1971. That's the synchronism for piano. The title Synchronisms refers to the integration of electronic and acoustic sound, to the synchronization of the player and pre-recorded sound by means of a carefully notated score, and to the interpenetration of different temporal levels active throughout each piece. There are excellent recordings of many of the synchronisms, but recordings can't replace the experience of a live performance of these works because manipulation of acoustical space is an essential part of their composition. Davidovsky has said, "I started to think about space in the same way that Schoenberg taught me about Klangfarbenmelodie. I was thinking about space-farben-melody, with space being almost like a color." This spatial manipulation recalls Edgar Varèse's concept of sound projection, where different sound strata are projected by dynamics, envelope, and concentration of frequencies so that certain events are heard in front of others, so to speak. The creation of meta-instruments is the most salient feature of the synchronisms. In synchronisms number 6, he writes, "In this particular piece, the electronic sounds in many instances modulate the acoustical characteristics of the piano by affecting its decay and attack characteristics. The electronic segment should perhaps not be viewed as an independent polyphonic line, but rather as if it were inlaid into the piano part. This junction is a characteristic feature of Davidovsky's music for purely acoustical instruments as well as electronic music. Indeed, much of his instrumental music draws on ideas he developed in the electronic medium. Dramatic registral, timbral, and dynamic shifts project pitch structure, which is chromatic but not serial. Davidovsky thinks of each of his works as a multiple narrative, as he explains in the following remarks, which I will include despite its length, because it precisely captures the quality of a conversation with Mario. "I will begin the piece more often than not with a statement like a motive. I try to make a statement in a similar manner to how Beethoven would present a theme in a symphony, very consistent and cohesive and natural and elegant. In my case, I will construct that kind of statement out of motives that are essentially very different from each other. You could say that each of those motives have their own implied rhythm, their own implied harmony, even their own character. Then what I do, more or less looking back to Beethoven, is to take those motives and actually generate a different piece of music. Instead of constructing voice leading, I will develop strata. You could say that Elliott Carter, does stratification, but the difference is that Elliott seems to talk about each instrument as a different person. In a way, my case involves one person telling 4 stories. The one person is the remnant of the voice leading. What I like to think I do is that each of those motives develops their own trajectory. It's almost like super glorified voices that develop a simultaneous story. Even though they might seem completely unrelated, eventually the 4 voices come together. Let's go back to the bunch of motives I have in my theme. One is sweet, etc. As the process of the piece begins, take the sweet guy, rework the material in such a way that it becomes bitter. The next time, go back and make it dancing and funny. What I like to do expressively is take all of these motives that have a certain character and make them imitate every character that exists in the commedia dell'arte, so to speak. To a certain extent, when you get to the end of the piece, all the motives equal 1, like very different types of brick building materials that are capable of transfiguration. In that context, all the materials are mastered and twisted, and by the end, they are very at peace with each other. I use this approach as a way to compensate for the fact that I have chosen not to use triadic harmony. Despite all this, Mario's music is essentially lyrical, with constant veiled references to the classical tradition, especially the Beethoven quartets. The 10th synchronism is clearly an homage, if not to the flamenco tradition itself, then to some characteristic features of flamenco guitar technique. The 10th synchronism is an excellent example of Davidovsky's musical world. The electronic portion of the work is unusual in that it is partially made from pre-recorded acoustic material, including highly modified guitar samples, while previous synchronisms had been created in a classical electronic music studio by recording and splicing electronically generated sound. We only have time to begin a discussion of this piece and to point out aspects in common with the other synchronisms. Then I'm referring to the example here. The guitar is alone for more or less the first 2/5 of the piece. In its opening measures, it introduces motives that will dominate both aspects. Here in the example, I'm not going to play the recording of this because we're going to hear it immediately, but you'll immediately recognize the repeated note figure in the beginning. In its opening measures, it introduces motives that will dominate both aspects. Each idea in this solo passage has an analog and development of the electronic sound. In fact, the guitar itself can be thought of in this piece as a kind of natural electronic music studio. The electronic sound enters al niente, and a first-time listener might mistakenly believe that the electronic sound enters before this point as a result of the guitar writing. Its sudden timbral and dynamic shifts, if you look at letters B and C in the example, again, you'll hear this in a moment, can be heard as projecting certain sounds toward the listener. This does not become completely evident until the electronic part becomes active, where disruptive guitar punctuations, now linked to electronic sounds, seem to project into stereo space, as in the climactic passage below. And you won't miss it in the recording. These marked distinctions in dynamic levels create different levels of spatial projection magnified by the electronic sound. A number of features common to all the synchronisms appear in this passage, each making use of the specific acoustical problem of its acoustical instrument. The modification of the attack and decay characteristics of the guitar by the electronic sound, voice passing, especially in the last 2 measures, and the amalgam of fast-paced acoustical and electronic ideas, exchange of color and function between the guitar and electronic sound, meaning the guitar becomes a generator of characteristic electronic sound, while the electronic sound takes on guitar-like qualities. While the above passage is an unusually dramatic moment, it also represents procedures throughout the piece. I'd like you to watch a performance of Synchronisms number 10. It's not by Jay Source in this case, it's by Travis J. Andrews. It'll be clear how these details shape the entire piece. Obviously, our discussion only scratches the surface of this compelling work, whose eloquence is built on dramatic gesture, humor, nostalgia, and many unnameable qualities. These embody an unusual and ardent musical voice. And here I just need to play the itself. Just this, yeah.
ありがとうございました。それでは質問その他、お願いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Sorry, may I ask a question? Okay. Well, I mean, the work is well for instrumentalists and also tape. So I guess my question is more regarding to the performative aspect of those pieces. Like I've known a few other pieces of synchronism, like for example, like cello, for example, Boston Musica Viva has a wonderful recording of it. I always wondered though, like how they practice, because as far as I understand, they just play the piece, they just play the tape, and the players just follow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just one continuous tape.
In general.
In general, right?
This one.
And I mean, in the first page of your paper, on the right column, you mentioned briefly about how the, if I understand correctly, you were mentioning about how he would write the tape part, and then somehow he writes the instrumental part. But obviously, I felt that because of the nature of performing these works, like the performers having to hear the work, the tape, and so they need to have some kind of auditory cues. You know, so
there's a note. I should have mentioned that there's a carefully notated tape part also.
Right.
And sometimes they're in conventional pitches. Other times they're in abstract shapes, but they're always in synchronized with the.
Yeah. So I do feel that in his works, I mean, his synchronisms, I suppose, there's a salient characteristic of having the tape part that are rather clearly demarcated in terms of the way the pulse is perceived. There are a lot of, there are some of the sustaining sonorities that he writes, but I suppose he's more conscious about the performers in the sense that I suppose that determines what kind of the electronic sound to utilize. There's a lot of sound that are really pointillistic, or in other words, those that are easy to catch and play together. Yeah, because I mean, if those tapes were full of sustaining sounds, obviously, yes, if it's noted into the score, then probably the performers could easily gather where to play and all that, but then it must be considerably more difficult to really know where the sustaining sound is beginning. It's, for example, when he would do, for example, niente attack, stuff like that. So I've been really curious about
Although I think I saw him trigger the CD or whatever was playing it back on at the moment when it started, and that's I think the only place in the piece where there's some question about how long things are going to take.
Thank you.
その他にありますね。
ですね、全文が英語で行われて、理工系的なプレゼンテーションじゃないものですから、語学力の差なのか、プレゼンなのか分かりませんけども、全体がやっぱりよく分からなくてですね、ここは川端さんにぜひアブストラクトというか、シンクロニズムっていうのを端的にですね、説明いただけるといかがでしょうか。いや、今日は通訳なしですから、日頃通訳がないと分からないという高尾さん自身ですから、やっぱりそうだなと思って今聞いてましたが、なんかポイントをですね、アブストラクト読むと、アブストラクトの範囲では分かりますけど、結局丁寧に説明しているところだとふっと抜けちゃうとなんだっけなっていう感じがあって、私だけならいいんですけど、英語ネイティブじゃないとなかなか難しくない気がして、ちょっと。
Also, would you like me to just summarize?
I'm sorry.
Osaka-san, would you like me to summarize?
Well, I hope on behalf of all the audience here, not all, but many of it's very hard to understand what the synchronism is. So I just asked Kawasan to briefly introduce in Japanese what it's all about.
通訳がない。急に言うことわかんないです。
いいよ、もう分かったから、
これ以外シンクロニズムっていうのはこれマリア・ドビュースキーが1960年代初めから書いてるシリーズでアナログのエレクトロニックサウンド、これテープに録音されたフィックスメディアですけど、それと楽器ですね。マイクお願いします。アナログのエレクトロニックサウンドと生楽器のためのシリーズで、楽器はいろいろですね、ピアノもありますし、今回みたいにギターもありますし、それでエレクトロニックサウンドの方はもうかっちり作られていて、それに、合わせて、生楽器が演奏するわけで、今大西さんの質問もだからそれ一つはどうやって同期させているのかってことでしたけど、まずそのシンクロニズムっていうタイトル自体がその動機っていうんですね。だからそのエレクトリックサウンドと、楽器の動機が、非常にもちろん重要なわけで、例えば今の楽器、今の曲の場合、曲の最初の5分の2ぐらいは生楽器だけ、ギターだけだったんですけど、最初にその電子音が入ってくるのは、デミニエンドで消える完全に無音に至るデミニエンドが、ギターの音と重なって出てきたんですね。なので最初に電子音が出てきた時は聴いてる人は気づかない。ギターの音がそのまま減衰しているように聞こえた。つまりそれぐらいですね、その動機ってことに非常にその神経を使っている曲なわけです。それでですね、いろんなことをいろんな比喩で言ってるんですけど、ですね、例えばそのですね、例えばそのエドガー・バレーズがなんかプロジェクションということを言って ましたね。その音を重ね合わせて、そのあるピッチがそう突出しているように聞こえるように音を重ね合わせてるっていうのを言ってましたけど、それと同じように、ダビドスキーはですね、やっぱ音の層を作ってるんだそうです。そしてですね、あと言ってたのは、待ってくださいね。で彼はですね、ダビドスキーはちょうどそのベートーベンがそのテーマからその曲を始めるように、例えばこのシンクロニズム、10番の場合は2つの、モチーフから、始めると。で、それをですね、そのあたかもですね、仮面即興劇の登場人物であるかのように、そのモチーフがですね、お互いにその、真似し合ったり、して、それで、ですね、それで、最終的にはその非常にその、トランスフィギュレーションしてましたけど、つまりその非常に美しくその変容していくと、そういう過程を作り上げている。それぐらいですかね。それぐらいですかね。大西さんどうですか、なんか付け加えて。
すごくいい要約ではなかったかと思います。僕ちょっと原稿がないので、ちょっと僕覚えてることしかちょっと言えないんですけども、今お話聞いてちょっとスクリーン上で読んだ中で、面白いなと気づいたのは、やはりその電子音楽と、生の楽器を一緒にそういうテープと楽器の音楽っていうものを書く上で、ダビドフスキーがそれまで起こってきた西洋音楽ですね、20世紀の音楽の流れにの中でどういうふうにその自分の作品のそのスタイルといいますか、自分のそのフィロソフィーというんですかね、哲学的なことを打ち立てていくかっていうので、ものすごく面白いことをグリーンバウム先生のペーパーの中で言ってるんですけども、シェーンベルクがクランファーベメロディーっていう、シェーンベルクって言いますと20世紀の当初の頭の12音音楽の技法だとか、あとクランファーベメロディーっていうのはですからピッチの音高をメロディーとするのではなくて、これはもしかしたらもうちょっと工学的な要素もあって面白いかと思うんですけども、音色の違いというものをモチーフにして、例えばいろんな楽器がいろんな音色で同じ音を吹くんですけども、それの音の違いっていうのをベースとしたそういうのをクランファーベメロディーっていうんですけども、それではなくてダビドフスキーではスペースファーベメロディーっていうことは、要するにその空間というものがそのまま空間という違う空間というものを色というふうに捉えて、それを組織化するというような音楽っていうのを作りたいっていうのがあったというのが書かれてありましたね。で、あともう一つはそのエリオット・カーターと彼のポリフォニック、要するに対法的な作曲の仕方の違いっていうのでちょっと面白いなと思って、それは2ページ目の、ですね、左側かなにあったあれなんですけども、ちょうどですからカーターがあたかも4人の違う人がいるようなものを表現したいって言ったのに対して、ダビドフスキーは1人の奏者が4つの違う 話っていうものをこう話していくって、それで層の話だとかそういうものが出てきたんではないかなと思います。今じゃ終わりますのですいません。それぐらいでした僕も気づいたのは。
ありがとうございました。ちょっとお話尽きないんですけれども、時間が参りましたので、また後ほどこういう付け入れするものがされていただきます。グリーンバウムさん、ありがとうございました。ちょっとタイムキーピングの仕切りが悪くて、かなり起きております。この後、総会があるんですけど、10分